So today on Flywire, we're going to look at the top 5 reasons why Bonanzas and Barons crash. Stick with me on Flywire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire, we're going to dig into about 38 years of accident data on Bonanzas and Barons to see if there's anything significant to learn. From that, we can glean the top 5 reasons for the crashes. But before I start, I think there's something important to note about statistics. Well, to mangle a movie quote, I don't think they mean what most folks think they mean. Yeah, that's close. Princess Bride, if you're wondering. Anyway, it's all about Mark Twain here. So if you don't know Mark Twain, well, you need to know who he is. You got to do some homework. Anyway, Mark Twain wrote in his autobiography over 100 years ago, I think it was 1907, that there are 3 kinds of lies. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And he attributed that phrase to Benjamin Disraeli, who had been the British Prime Minister for 16 years, starting in 1874. The thrust of the comment is to throw shade on the use of statistics to prove anything. The funny thing about the quote actually is that there's no actual reference that Disraeli ever said it. Maybe Twain was using some kind of circular logic. But the point is, I think, to take any statement or statistic with a large grain of salt. Okay? And I found that Twain usually had a point that went deeper than it appeared the first time you read it. Anyway, so we're going to talk about statistics. What are statistics? Well, I'm not going to do a bell curve. I'm not going to do regressive analysis. I'm not even going to figure out the standard deviations like they're on here, all that kind of stuff. I simply want to see defined categories that I can then identify the top 5 reasons why Bonanzas and Barons crash. So it's kind of a simple counting addition. Then I'm going to finish up with what we can learn from those top 5 crash reasons. For this video, part 1 of a 2-part series, I'm going to lay out all the statistics, and then in part 2, I'm going to talk about the top 5 reasons why we crash Bonanzas and Barons. YouTube doesn't like long videos, so who knows, maybe I'll eventually do a part 3 comparing the Beechcraft with Cessna, Piper, and Cirri. Stand by. We'll see. The catchphrase these days seems to be, listen to the data, pay attention to the data, yada, yada, yada. Well, I want to tell you that it really isn't that simple. And this in particular, this database that I dug through is not in any way comprehensive. There's no simple search term to cull fields, and when you do pull a particular accident out of the database, it comes stripped of important details, like the actual model of the airplane. But what I did find were 227 Bonanza and Baron accidents from 1983 to the end of 2021 in the NTSB Carroll database. But there's a lot we don't know. Very little data surrounding the actual crash, the people involved, survives in the record. We know nothing of the experience of the folks involved or the issues that were existent prior to the crash. We don't know how many airplanes were resurrected and returned to flying. I don't capture that stuff. And frankly, I didn't spend time to dig through all of the records of crashes prior to 1983. Frankly, they're a bit sketchier than the Carroll database. There probably is value in looking into that statistic, but I'm going to leave it to someone working on a doctorate in crashology, if there is such a thing. Some interesting nuggets from the Carroll database. On average, the NTSB produced a probable cause finding in, wait for it, 3/4 of the accidents. So over 27% of the Bonanza accidents and 32% of the Baron accidents are excluded. No probable cause. We don't really know. They don't say what happens. Actual recommendations for Bonanzas were produced for only 0.3% of the crashes, and in Barons, that's 0.1%. Yeah, you heard that right, a fraction of 1% for either one of those. Not a very stellar result for a tremendous amount of effort. No wonder we haven't made huge progress improving accident rates. If you don't know what's happening, you don't know what's happening, and you can't focus on that. From a purist standpoint, it means that all these statistics that I'm able to provide you represent only trends. That's it. We don't know exactly what happened, and we can't base precise policy on this data. So my takeaway from this trek through the Hall of Records is that if there is any value in learning from the mistakes of others, we have to derive it ourselves. We can't wait for the NTSB to figure it out for us. It ain't happening. And we can probably do that before 2 years have elapsed anyway, so when people have forgotten all about it. Anyway, I digress. That's political. I know there will be a lot of questions and probably some arguments about the racking and stacking of this top 5 for Beechcraft, and then from a larger perspective, comparing rates with Cessnas and Pipers and Cirri. I mean, that begs the question there. Maybe I'll do a video on that. We'll see. The NTSB's Carroll database entries go back to 1983, and as I said, the previous time periods are a bit scattershot, and there's even less information worldwide. Nobody seems to be, even host countries, particular countries are keeping that data. I broke out this data by series. It seemed like the easiest thing to do. The 35 series, the 33 and the 36 series, and then I looked at the 55 and 58 Barons. The 56s are in there too. Full disclosure, I had a part-time job in college as a Fortran SPIS programmer, pulling databases for professors to use in their research. And I'll also admit to a thing for operation research, and that makes me believe that statistics can highlight real problem areas of a system. And for some reason, I've been involved in flying safety for what surprisingly is a long time. Anyway, I say this because I think that this data is representative and can help us target the hit list and maybe bring down some of these numbers, even though there's lies, damn lies, in statistics. So let's get down to business. How do these damn lies or statistics stack up? That's the question here. So let's take a look at 35s first. For the 35 series, and that's the V-tail Bonanzas for those of you in Rio Hondo, Beech supposedly made 10,655 of these from 47 to 92. Okay, that's quite a lot of airplanes. They're still sort of making Bonanzas today. For my period of study, there were 1,223 crashes, that was 11% of the fleet, and on average that's 32.2 per year, or 2.7 crashes a month. Of course, that's just a statistic. In reality, sometimes there are more, sometimes less, sometimes none. There were 385 fatal accidents and 755 lives lost. 5,000 V-tails are still on the U.S. registry. Now we come to 33s. The 33 series Bonanza, there were 3,248 of them built, 1960 to 1995, and just under a third of what the V-tails were made. The original concept was a cheaper version of the corresponding V-tail model, and they called it the Debonair. Pretty much the 33 is a conventional tail version of the 35. Eventually, Beechcraft dropped the separate line and called them all Bonanzas. It happened in 1970, I think, with the F-33 series. So, anyway, should have hit that. I guess I'm not a purist. I'm going to call them Bonanzas anyway. There are 321 crashes of 33 series Bonanzas. There we go. And for a rate of 10% for the fleet. 8.4 crashes a year and 0.7 a month. Spoiler alert, the 33 has the best accident rate of all the Bonanzas and Barons. 99 fatal accidents and 183 lives lost. 1,940 are still on the U.S. registry. So, you already saw my preview there. As an aside, I have to mention the aerobatic Bonanza. The first 25 E-33Cs were a production development of the E-33B when were designed for aerobatics. There were 154 F-33Cs built, mostly for Lufthansa and KLM, and they used them as pilot trainers. Several other air forces, Spain and Mexico, bought them as well, and I would argue that as a model, these airplanes have an average hourly usage per airframe that is higher than any other Bonanza, period, dot. Most of them went upside down for more than a time or two in their history. And I'm sure you probably think this is risky behavior, and so the accident rate's got to be pretty high for this model, right? Well, the NTSB Carroll database reports crashes worldwide, so 1983 on. Earlier database doesn't. So just what are the numbers for the aerobatic Bonanza? See what it really happens. So in the Carroll database, no E-33C crashes are recorded. There were 2 incidents of a nose gear collapse with no injuries, and that was the same airplane, by the way. And not in the Carroll database, there was a fatal crash in Germany of an E-33C, and it was fuel starvation during a go-around. and then the subsequent stall spin instead of landing. There were a lot of open fields, but the pilot didn't do that. One was gear retraction on F-33C, was a gear retraction on landing rollout in 1979, and the other one was a stall spin at low altitude turning to final after a door pop in Houston. No fatality there. The only fatality listed is the Germany crash. But I was able to dig through other stuff, and I found overseas accidents, scattershot, but I found them. The best I could determine, there were 22 crashes, and 10 of those were fatal. By far, the Mexican Air Force had most of those crashes, most of those fatalities. I think 8 or 10, something like that. Very few of these have any real documentation, so I can't go into any detail. But as for here in the States and in Europe, I would say, qualified to say, that the aerobatic Bonanza has the best safety record of all the Bonanza models, period. The major operations were at Lufthansa in Goodyear, Arizona, and KLM in Holland. My airplane is a KLM bird, and nothing in the record that reflects a crash outside of the scope of any other Bonanza series airplane. So in other words, doing aerobatics or spins or anything like that. This doesn't mean that one of these poorly documented crashes didn't happen during aerobatics. I just don't know. But I'd say that's not bad for an airplane for extreme maneuvering. Maybe I'm biased, but I am partial to aerobatic Bonanzas, and it's just a fun airplane to fly. Knock on wood. All right, that brings us to 36s. The A36, in my opinion, brought real utility to the Bonanza line. I can say that because I've owned 3 V-tails, 1 straight tail, that F-33C, and this A36. Who would have figured that a 10-inch extension to the fuselage would make such a difference? Operationally, one difference that stands out is the sheer number of takeoff accidents as opposed to the 33 and 35 series models. The CG range is more generous, and certain models can gross over 4,000 pounds. It does need more room for takeoff than the shorter body airplanes, period, it does. And in apples to apples comparison by numbers built, we could look at the A36 with the 33 series, they're actually pretty close, and there were more than double the takeoff-related accidents for the 36 series, double. Anyway, let's look at the accidents here. There have been about 4,136 airplanes built, approximately, and for this study period, there were 683 crashes, of which 244 were fatal. Comes out to about 18 accidents a year on average, or 1.5 a month. 541 lives were lost in A36s. There are still 2,694 on the registry. To extend the statistics a bit, we can look at fatal accidents as a percentage of total accidents per type. For the 35 and 33 series, fatal accidents were tied at 31% of the total build. The 36 series posted a slightly higher number with fatal accidents at 36% of the total number built. The 33 series posted the fewest average fatalities per fatal accident at 1.8, the 35 series at 2.0, and the 36 series at 2.2. Okay. All told, there are about 9,634 Bonanzas still on the registry out of 18,030 that were manufactured, approximately. There are quite a few still flying around the world, so don't count that difference as hull losses. I just don't know how many crashes there were. So, let's look at Barons. I will alibi here that I think I got close to how many 55s and 58s were made, but I can't say it's definitive. There's nothing out there that's really definitive, but it is what it is. The first 55 series, there were a total of 3,651 over 6 different models built, and there were 438 accidents, of which 169 were fatal, making 39% of the accidents fatal for 341 people. The fatality average was 2.0 with 11.5 crashes a year, and the accident rate was 12% of the fleet, and there's still 2,125 still on the U.S. registry. Okay, the 58s, there are about 3,233 58s built, and they posted 372 accidents, 137 fatal, 329 people died for an average of 2.2 fatal per crash. Okay, so that means that about 9.8 airplanes a year were lost, 2.4 people, I mentioned that, 2.4 people killed in the fatal act crashes. I made a mistake there before. 2.4 was the number. The accident rate was for the percentage of the fleet was 12%, with 37% of the total 58 accidents were fatal. The total Baron 58 accidents. There's still 1,118 on the U.S. registry. Statistically, you would be slightly less likely to be involved in a fatal crash in a 58 Baron, but in a 58 crash, generally more people are at risk, and so more people died per crash. Perhaps this makes sense because the 58 can carry 6 instead of 4 people, pretty much. So, anyway, which is the safer airplane? For all these statistics, it's clear that the Bonanza is safer than the Baron airplanes. I think that's interesting because it would seem that having 2 engines would surely make operations safer, but that doesn't seem to be the case. What really strikes me is that this isn't a statistically significant difference between the singles and twins. It's very small. Anecdotally, one could argue that the twins fly into more adverse weather, easy for you to say, with more people on operationally more difficult missions. Maybe that makes up the difference between the two types. The answer, I believe, would be more subjective than objective, and I'm not going to go into it. But the model with the best record is the 33 series overall. Again, not by much, but it is better. Anyway, stay tuned for part 2, where I use these statistics to figure out why these airplanes crash. Is there a correlation between exposure and crashes, or is there a difference between crash categories for all these airplanes? Come on, stick around for next week. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Flywire.